Today's recap is The Invisible Man. We meet Cecilia, who awakens early in the morning and carefully gets out of bed while her boyfriend sleeps. It's implied she's drugged him with diazepam, putting him into a deep sleep. She quietly makes her way to the closet where she retrieves a bag hidden in a vent filled with essential items. Before leaving the room, she moves a security camera to keep an eye on her boyfriend. As she sneaks through the house, Cecilia enters a lab where she begins disarming the security system. Something strange catches her eye, a display stand with nothing in it. For some ineffable reason, she can't tear her gaze away from it. Continuing her escape, she accidentally kicks the dog's food bowl, causing an incredible racket. Panicked, she checks the camera feed and finds her boyfriend still sound asleep. After changing clothes, she heads downstairs through the garage but is startled by something behind her. Turning around, she discovers it's their dog, Zeus. Relieved, she apologizes, saying she can't take him with her. However, when Zeus whines, she changes her mind and rushes over to remove his electric collar. As she does, Zeus bumps into a car, triggering its alarm. The dog bolts, and Cecilia, thinking it's a great idea, runs as well. As she scales a fence, lights in the house start turning on, suggesting her boyfriend is now awake, or maybe the house is haunted. After running away from the house, Cecilia makes it to a road and audibly states, "Emily, where are you?" She appears on edge as she looks back at the tree line she came from, unsettled by the squeaking sound of tree branches. Relief washes over her when she sees a set of car headlights in the distance. She runs to the car and opens the back door to throw her bag in, but as she does, the bottle of diazepam falls to the ground. As Cecilia gets into the car, we meet Emily, her sister, who, oblivious to the situation, asks what's going on. Cecilia responds that she'll explain later and urges her to just drive. Suddenly, we meet her boyfriend's fist, which smashes the car's window as Emily speeds away. Adrian, her boyfriend, then finds the bottle of diazepam lying in the middle of the road. 2 weeks later, we're introduced to James, Cecilia's best friend, who she's been staying with. We learn that she is afraid to leave the house, fearing Adrian might be lurking nearby. James tries to reassure her. Emily comes over to visit, but Cecilia doesn't seem too pleased, appearing stressed by her presence. She explains that she asked Emily not to visit because Adrian knows where she lives and might follow her. Emily then tells her sister that Adrian is dead, reportedly having taken his own life, leaving Cecilia in utter disbelief. Later, Cecilia reveals that Adrian controlled every aspect of her life, what she wore, what she ate, when she could leave the house, even dictating baby-making time. That same day, James hands Cecilia some mail addressed to her, which catches her off guard since no one knows she's there. It turns out to be a notice to heirs. We then meet Tom, Adrian's brother, who is the appointed attorney of the trust. Things get tense when Emily shuts down his attempt to read a letter written by Adrian. Tom tells Cecilia that his brother left her $5 million with the condition that she not commit any crimes. All she has to do is sign. As a thank you to James and his daughter, Cecilia buys them a brand new ladder and also covers school costs for Sydney, James' daughter. Later that night, when Cecilia is by herself, she gets the unsettling feeling that she's being watched, but she quickly dismisses it. The next day, while making breakfast, Cecilia goes to wake Sydney when the stove mysteriously turns to a higher heat by itself, causing a small fire to break out. Sydney manages to extinguish it. Later that evening, Cecilia once again feels like she's being watched, though no one seems to be there, or at least she can't see anyone. She calls for James but hears no response, so she gets up to walk around the house, searching multiple rooms until she hears the front door open. She steps outside to look around, the air cold enough to see her breath. A breath suddenly emanates from behind her, seemingly out of thin air. While she doesn't see anything, she senses something is behind her before heading back inside. Later, while asleep, sharing a bed with Sydney, someone removes the blanket and the room lights up several times. Cecilia wakes to find a figure standing over the bed, only it turns out to be something inanimate. She finds the blanket on the floor and suspiciously looks over at an empty chair. She throws the blanket over it, revealing nothing there. As she drags the blanket back to bed, it snags, as if something is weighing it down. Then it appears as if someone is walking on it. The blanket begins to sink before it's yanked right out of her hands. Cecilia screams for James, waking Sydney in the process. Not seeing anyone in the room, James just assumes the B word must be trippin' and tells her not to stress, reminding her to get some sleep for her interview tomorrow. The The next day, at her job interview for a role as an architect, everything seems to be going smoothly until Cecilia opens her portfolio to show her work, only to find it's empty. She faints shortly afterward. After a trip to the hospital, she returns home and receives a call from a doctor informing her that she had enough diazepam in her system to constitute a mild overdose. During the phone call, she finds the bottle she dropped the night she ran away from Adrian. Cecilia and James visit Tom, demanding he tell his brother to stop what he's doing. She recounts a time Adrian told her that she could never leave him, that wherever she went, he would find her. She wouldn't be able to see him, but he would leave her a sign. Cecilia then places the diazepam bottle on the table, explaining that she drugged Adrian and lost the bottle that night, and now it has made its way back to her. She insists that Adrian isn't dead and believes he's figured out a way to become invisible, citing his expertise as a world leader in the field of optics. Tom tells her that Adrian was great at getting into people's heads, admitting he was controlled long before her. He even confesses to hating his brother and feeling relieved when he died. As a final attempt to reassure her, he pulls out an envelope containing photographs of Adrian's body when it was discovered. Cecilia visits Emily, who seems distant. Emily mentions an email she received from Cecilia earlier that morning. Cecilia insists she didn't send any email, but Emily shuts the door on her. Upon returning home and reading the email for herself, Cecilia has an emotional breakdown. To cheer her up, Sydney suggests a girls' night out, but is suddenly hit by an unseen force. She calls out for James and, thinking it was Cecilia, blames her. James, frustrated by the mention of Adrian, decides to take Sydney somewhere safer, suggesting that Cecilia should stay at her sister's place because she doesn't need to be there right now. Cecilia, looking around the house, starts to call out the invisible intruder for hitting a little girl. She grabs a knife and some coffee beans to scatter around the floor of a bedroom, then sits down to watch the doorway. I love how switched on and resourceful this character is. As she waits, Cecilia questions Adrian's obsession with her. He could have anyone, so why her? Crawling over to a phone, she dials Adrian's number, only to hear a phone vibrating in the attic. Naturally, she goes to check it out. Once in the attic, she calls his number again to locate the phone. On it, she finds pictures of her and Sydney sleeping, along with a knife sealed in a plastic bag and her portfolio. The phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. Surprise! Peering over the attic hatch, knowing she isn't alone, Cecilia grabs a can of paint and tips it over, revealing the outline of a figure. She recoils as the sweeted figure scatters. Dropping down from the attic, she picks up a knife and cautiously follows the trail of paint. Tension builds as the trail suddenly ends. A running tap catches her attention, and as she turns it off, she realizes the figure has washed off the paint. Out of nowhere, she is grabbed by the neck and thrown into a wall, losing the knife in the process. The two engage in a mostly one-sided scuffle, but she manages to escape the house. She orders a rideshare and, upon getting in, tells the driver to lock the doors and just go. The driver takes her to Adrian's house. After sneaking back in, she is reunited with Zeus, and the two make their way to the lab. Cecilia heads to the empty stand that caught her eye the night she escaped, and discovers it houses a high-tech suit covered in tiny cameras, and it has the ability to turn invisible. As she starts removing the suit, Zeus begins barking at an unseen person, prompting Cecilia to return to the bedroom closet. She hides the suit in the same place she hid her exit bag at the beginning of the movie. The closet door opens, but no one is there. A footprint imprints on the carpet, and Cecilia attempts to flee, only to be thrown to the ground. Before the invisible man can do anything else, Zeus, being the good boy he is, intervenes, buying her enough time to make it back to her rideshare. Imagine the fare the driver got for this trip. Later that night, a visibly happy Cecilia meets with an upset Emily. Cecilia expresses the love she has for her sister and confides in her about what she discovered at Adrian's house. A skeptical Emily asks what she found, but becomes distracted by a floating knife behind Cecilia's head. In one swift motion, the knife drags across Emily's neck before it's forcibly placed into Cecilia's hand. Emily drops dead. A fellow patron screams, "Never seen someone murdered in a restaurant before? Grow up, lady." She is arrested and taken to a psych ward, where she continues to appear schizophrenic, hurling insults at a wall before being restrained and sedated. As she drifts off, she hears Adrian's voice whisper, "Surprise." Sometime later, Cecilia is being interviewed by James and a fellow officer who are investigating her sister's murder. They question her movements and bring up the email that was sent. Cecilia whispers to James that she has something to prove Adrian is alive, but she can't reveal it right now because he's in the room, listening. The other officer leaves, and James expresses guilt over leaving her alone. Later, a nurse informs her that the results of a blood test indicate she's pregnant. Tom visits Cecilia and expresses how upsetting it is to see her in that condition. He goes on to explain that the $5 million trust she was given is now void due to her committing a crime and being ruled mentally incompetent. Cecilia fires back with, "I used to feel sorry for you," calling him nothing more than a permanent punching bag for his sociopathic brother. She refers to him as the jellyfish version of Adrian, implying he's the same but without a spine. Tom then presents her with two options: sign a document forfeiting the trust, or agree to have the baby and stay with Adrian. He hands her a phone, saying all she has to do is call him. Judging by the look on her face, it's clear she's not a fan of either choice. She throws some of his belongings to the floor and discreetly swipes a pen while he gathers his things. As he leaves, Cecilia also grabs some blue tack from the table. Later that night, Cecilia carries out her plan utilizing the pen she stole from Tom. She proclaims, "You won't get the baby, and you won't get me." And the Invisible Man grabs her, revealing that her plan was a ploy, a trap to bait him. Cecilia attacks him with the pen, damaging the suit, and continues to strike him with the pen repeatedly. He pushes her off, and as he does, an officer sees her out of bed. When the cop enters the room, he notices the glitching suit and pulls out his stun baton, only for it to be turned back on him. Cecilia rushes past and attempts to escape, but runs into two other officers. Some chaos ensues in the corridor with multiple officers before one has his gun stolen. The invisible figure holds the officer at gunpoint, taunting him by saying, "Bang!" shooting the officer as he walks away before dropping the gun. Cecilia grabs a gun and chases after the maniac. In a tense scene outside, she finds a car with its trunk open when the suited figure suddenly emerges, grabbing her by the neck and shoving her against an ambulance. Fed up with her resistance, Adrian threatens to harm Sydney to force Cecilia into cooperating. An officer sees the Invisible Man and orders him to freeze, but Adrian incapacitates the officer without killing him, then walks off into the night. Cecilia, armed once again, follows him. Adrian, now in a car, begins to flee. Cecilia attempts to shoot him, missing but causing him to swerve, which results in an innocent bystander crashing. The poor guy then gets his car stolen. With a phone in the car, Cecilia calls James to warn him about the danger Sydney is in. We see the door to James's home open to no one. Sydney wakes up and, despite not seeing anything, grabs some mace and sprays it at the door frame, causing the invisible figure to stumble into some furniture. As she tries to run away, she gets clotheslined. Despite his earlier doubts, James heeds Cecilia's warning and rushes back home with his weapon drawn. He finds his daughter on the ground, and the Invisible Man starts to beat James up pretty badly. Out of nowhere, Cecilia shows up with a fire extinguisher, spraying the man to reveal his outline. She pulls out a gat, and 1 pop, 2 pop, 3 pop, 4. The Invisible Man, now injured, stumbles out of the hallway and falls to the floor. Pulling off the mask, she discovers it's Tom, much to Cecilia's surprise. We see a highly armed tactical team searching Adrian's home, where they discover Adrian tied up and beaten in his basement. James tells Cecilia about this development, saying Adrian appears to be a victim in all of this. However, she doesn't buy it, insisting that Adrian was involved and is just using his brother as a fall guy. Later, Cecilia calls Adrian, and they arrange to meet for dinner. He expresses his feelings and admits that he didn't treat her the best when they were together. She is willing to take him back only if he admits that he was responsible and not his brother. He claims that, although it may not have seemed like it, Tom controlled him. She refuses to believe him despite his claims of innocence. We find out that Cecilia is wearing a wire, with James listening in nearby. As she becomes upset, Adrian walks over to comfort her, saying he's the only one who can help her because he knows her better than anyone else, and that shouldn't come as a surprise. Cecilia excuses herself to go to the bathroom. When she's away, Adrian jerks back suddenly and does something silly to his own throat before collapsing to the floor. Cecilia returns and screams in shock, calling the police to report that he has tried to take his own life. All of this is recorded by the home's security camera. Once off the phone and out of sight of the camera, she begins to gloat over the dying Adrian, returning his famous surprise right back at him. James rushes to the house to find Zeus and Cecilia, who reassures him. James notices the suit in her bag and questions if she ever wanted to catch him. Despite knowing the truth, James lets her go. And that's the Invisible Man. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to make love to the like button or else consider subscribing as I upload recaps on a regular basis. The word for the day is nincompoop, which means a fool or simpleton, kinda like Adrian for leaving his phone on vibrate and for not changing the codes to his home security system. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, bye-bye.